Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tactical
No,
Wisdom
no, no,
Channel.
no, no. This takes a few seconds to connect.
Let me know.
All right, it's good now.
Technical difficulties, everybody. Welcome to the Tactical Wisdom Channel. This morning, we're talking with Gideon once again of Guerrilla Media from South Africa. How are you this morning?
I'm doing fantastic, and it's great to. Well, I was about to say, long time no see. It's literally been about 2 days,
It's
and
been
it's
about two
always
days.
great
Yeah.
to talk to you, Joe. Thank you for the invite.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think that we started a good conversation the other day, and I just think that there's a few other points that we want to
You,
dig a
Joe.
little
Thank.
deeper in over here that are more relevant to preparedness than current events. Watcher, how are you this morning? Not that anyone cares, but how are you?
Thanks, boss. Doing fantastic. Glad to be here with Gideon, man. It's good to have you back.
Yeah.
It's
So
great to be
as we
here.
go
Thank you.
Yeah, as we go through, Watcher's going to be kind of like the DJ, spinning the discs in the background and covering things. So let's talk a little bit about where South Africa is now. And the IMF said this morning that South Africa is at risk of more unrest due to rising energy and fuel prices, or energy and food prices. What's your take on that, Gideon?
So that's. I wouldn't say that's hysterical at all. I think it's a very relevant concern. Now, just to give some. I'm going to give the nutshell, big picture overview, historical background. Otherwise, we'll be here all day with it. But South Africa's economic situation is we are still about 4 years ago, we were in the longest sustained economic downturn that we've had since the end of World War II. That's obviously extended now by 4 to 5 years. The whole COVID lockdown malarkey has effectively curb stomped and then machine gunned an economy that was already on life support. So it's not a pretty picture that forms what forms an additional segment to this that's quite alarming is that we've had spiking energy prices, particularly with regards to electricity prices that have increased drastically, way above the normal inflation rate for years now, as well as the fact that our fuel price, which is probably the single most important economic input that we have, has also increased drastically over the past, I think, 2 years, as well as LPG gas prices, but that's a worldwide phenomenon anyway. So what we have is an already fragile economy with a whole bunch of social stresses as part of that, because you've got this inequality line, you've got huge amounts of poverty, desperation. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, if not the highest unemployment rate, a shrinking tax base, and a huge amount of people, like I think 20 million South Africans, are dependent on government handouts for their survival. So the government is literally printing money that it is handing out on a monthly basis in order to stop people from starving, as well as to stop them from rioting. And that beneficiary base has grown exponentially over the past 10 years. And the people funding the grants, so to speak, the handouts, have shrunk via immigration, loss of skills, loss of high net worth individuals, productivity. Entire sectors like mining, manufacturing have shut down. So it's a terrible. It is a. I think a guy called Stefan Molyneux many years ago described South Africa as a penal colony of welfare addiction, which is correct. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
that's a bad call. And as you can imagine, we saw this massive flare up last year with the most destructive rioting and looting possibly in our national history, and none of the underlying factors that led to that have dissipated. In fact, they've gotten worse. And to follow up on that, we had a natural disaster in the exact same area that has wrecked the economy there, and infrastructure there as well, over the past 2 to 3 weeks ago. So it's a dire situation. And I'm not here to be pessimistic about it. We're here to talk solutions, preparedness, all that stuff. But I think for that conversation to happen, I want people to be fully appraised of how bad it is first, um, and not think we're being hysterical. All the stuff I'm saying is fully available in the public domain. You can search it up. You can confirm it with a quick Google search.
Okay. All right. So that was one of the questions that a viewer had sent me is how are the grants to families and individuals, how are they funded, and how are they impacting personal productivity? Because here in America, there's a huge push towards universal basic income, which is what the grants you were just talking about really are. And I know someone might say, what's that got to do with preparedness? It's got a lot to do with preparedness, because when that money gets shut off, those people are going to need to find things elsewhere. So how are the grants working out? What's it doing to productivity? All that kind of stuff.
So productivity in SA is low. We're not a high productivity country. It's visible just by looking at our trend of our GDP and the type of industries that we're capable of sustaining here, which is not very specialized, and we've lost a lot of export capacity due to manufacturers here rather packing up shop and moving elsewhere, whether it's China or even Lesotho, which is just across our border. And a lot of that productivity loss has got to do with our public education system, which is a complete wreck. So you don't have high skilled workers. You have guys that have got menial skills, but international industry, and to be internationally competitive, you actually need high skilled people with a lot of technical ability that we don't have. That's part of the problem. And another element to this is just the grants specifically. So the grants are funded through taxpayer money. Our tax base is only about 5 million strong in a country of 60 million. And of that 5 million, the overwhelming majority of personal income tax is paid by about 250,000 individuals only. So wow. 250,000 people are supporting the universal basic income effectively of 20 million people, which is, if I had to say that's highly unsustainable, would you say that's maybe?
That would be a bit of an understatement.
A bit of an understatement. What adds to our lack of productivity, what makes the situation so much worse, is we probably have one of the highest individual tax rates in the world, because the income tax rate is high. It sits between 30 and 40% for most people earning anything that we would describe as a middle class income. Plus, then you have a 15% sales tax on everything you buy. More than half of our fuel price consists of levies and taxes. Every single thing you do in this country is tax. So your tax burden as a normal person is probably high up in the 70 to 75% of what you earn. And the worst part of it is you get absolutely nothing for it, because you can't use the public hospitals because you will die. You cannot rely on state security apparatus like the police to protect you, because they won't. You need to then buy private security. So you need to buy private healthcare. You need to buy private security. You may even have to, depending upon who you are, buy private schooling, because public schooling is a disaster. It is. So the situation is not conducive to being productive, to building a wealth base, or to supporting people. And as you can imagine, once an industry shuts down or an employer shuts down and people are laid off, the chances of those people finding employment somewhere else, it just gets lower and lower and lower, because they just go into this pool that competes for fewer and fewer jobs.
And you have people who say, well, I was making X number of dollars. There's jobs available, but they're at a lower rate than what I was. So I would rather take $0, because I'm also getting a government handout, than go back to working somewhere where I might have to work more hours in order to make the same money. And that's really the point I wanted to make with that for our viewers, is that universal basic income, or some guarantee of a minimum, leads to zero productivity. No one wants to better themselves because they're getting something for nothing. So why get out there? There's one more piece of the equation before we start talking about the actual preparedness pieces of this that I think applies in South Africa. How's immigration into South Africa, illegal immigration into South Africa?
It's massive, especially from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, the DRC, and Nigeria. And it's a hot topic issue, in the sense that, on the one hand, a lot of the illegal immigrants are quite highly skilled, and they have the capacity to actually create economic opportunities here. But because they're not recognized as legal immigrants, they cannot. And then another segment of the illegal immigrants are outright terrible, in the sense they're violent criminals. They are not. They are a burden, they're not a benefit. So, but there's no conversation about splitting the two up. If we had a conversation here and say, cool, let's encourage skilled immigration from other countries because we need the skill set to build up our own sort of societal institutions. Right. That would make a lot more sense. But no, massive illegal immigration problem. And I think just to add if I can, my own opinion on this UBI story, I think what people might not be seeing in the US that might be advocating for it, but that's clearly visible here. Big governments love UBIs, they love grants, because essentially what happens is the government becomes the sole form of sustenance for people. You become outright and utterly dependent on government for your survival. You have no independence anymore. You essentially it's soft slavery. There's no chains and no whips, but you are dependent on people who are supposed to be your public servants for your existence. And if you don't behave, for example, in a dystopian society, and they cut you off, that's the end. And yeah, I don't think a lot of people are seeing those woods for the trees necessarily.
Uh-oh. Hey, Joe, I am going to make you the host of the meeting in hopes that it doesn't kick us.
You're going to have to do something.
In hopes that it doesn't kick us. Can you hit the little upgrade button at the top and see if it lets you keep it?
Well, I'm going to log in and see if that does it. We have a little bit of technical problem going on right now.
You see, the free version of the software that we're using only gives you 40 minutes, but we bought it, but Joe bought it. So I thought
last night I told you to log in using what I gave you.
I don't remember getting login credentials, but what I did remember is I thought that we had that there was some kind of way for you to like tag my account as. Anyhow, doesn't matter. We've got 9 minutes, so we can keep talking.
So it's a bit like MacGyver. The counter is counting down, and at the last second, we'll.
Oh, I mean, if worst comes to worst, I'll just make a new room and then re-invite you, and we'll have like a 10-second gap where people can run to the bathroom.
Well, so I wanted to bring those things up because when you look at America, we've got people pushing for the universal basic income. We've got rampant illegal immigration. We've got rising food costs, and we've got rising energy costs. So it's kind of the same perfect storm that you're already in. So
I'm not going to say that you guys are going to look the same as we do, but what we're definitely going to see in South Africa, and the reason I'm saying definitely going to see it is because we've seen it before, is whenever there's an economic pressure of sorts that people are feeling at grassroots level, there's always an explosion of xenophobic violence, but like the real bad stuff where people are literally burnt alive, where they have vehicle tires put around their necks, petrol poured on them or fuel poured on them, and then set alight while they're still alive, where they're beaten to death, where they're hacked to death. It's the worst kind of violent excess imaginable, and it's almost impossible to prevent and to stop once it kicks off. It takes a huge amount of energy to get the genie back in the bottle. And obviously, as our state security apparatus has been defunded by government ineptitude, we don't have an official defund the police. The government defunds the police every single year through its own incompetence. So that's a problem. And unfortunately, your line between xenophobic violence and race-based violence and just overall chaos is thin. It doesn't take much for the one to transition into the other. But I mean, America, you guys had the Summer of Love. I tried keeping up with it, but that appeared horrendously destructive and dangerous.
It was.
Right.
So while Joe's busy there trying to solve the thing,
I'm
maybe
just
while
trying to solve the problem.
Oh, okay. Let me pan for you then. Like, yeah, it
Well,
was.
actually,
I
though,
was about,
seriously, let's have Gideon talk about what he does, so that ties us into the preparedness conversation I'm about to have.
so would that be what I do professionally, or what I do from a preparedness point of view?
Preparedness point of view.
Preparedness point of view. So I'm actually trying to follow your advice in your books, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we do. I desperately would love to talk about Joe's books, because it was one of those things I took a chance, just bought it on Kindle, because what I know of preparedness is scarily little. But I like to believe, I can read, so I'm not a total moron. And immediately upon opening the stuff up, the way that you put it was hugely sensible. It just made complete sense to me from a rational point of view. So what I've tried to do in my personal situation, because we don't have reliable electricity in South Africa, which is a major problem, I've rigged my house with solar power. So I'm about 80% off grid, not 100%, but about 80%, as well as the fact that for water heating, I've got a gas geyser system that works really well. The stove is gas. So I'm either cooking on gas, or I'm cooking on open fire, or I use very limited electricity for other cooking needs. Refrigeration is looked after. If the grid stays up or fails, it doesn't matter. Water wise, we don't have any funny restrictions in South Africa pertaining to collecting rainwater. You can collect as much of the stuff as you want. So a sensible person would rig their gutter system to feed through a filter, if they're being particularly pedantic about it, into rainwater collection tanks, which we've got. Vegetable garden, I have that up and running, but badly, because I don't have a green thumb. I just look at plants and they die. So I might need to upskill in that regard a bit. And then every time I go to the store, I buy a small packet of dried vegetable protein, whether it's split peas or lentils or something, because it's cheap. It's not taxed. It's some of it, or most of it, is zero tax goods in South Africa, because it's considered an essential good. And the stuff lasts almost forever if you look after it and store it properly. So those are all basic things, because when we talk about preparedness, it's second and third order effects, right? Like preparing for specific stuff, scenarios in your head, is not necessarily what's going to give you success. But I mean, obviously guns and ammo I'm all into, but that's not probably not the most important part of this.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we're going to have to schedule a new meeting. Watcher, can you put something on the screen for like 5 seconds while we do a quick new meeting?
Yeah, it's not a problem. I'm just going to turn this off, and then I'll chat to the audience while we get it set up in the background. So
All right.
while we're here, guys, this is a perfect opportunity to say thank you for being here, and please take the opportunity to go ahead and hit that like button. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It'll be just a few seconds until our new meeting is set up. Joe, why don't you go ahead and be the one to create it so that we don't run into this issue?
That's what I'm doing right now.
Perfection. So I will just join that. By the way, chat, if you haven't done so already, Joe Dolio's books and blog are available at tactical-wisdom.com. I'm going to go ahead and link that in the chat now, but that's Tactical Wisdom. We've also got a few links for our guest, Gideon. They can still hear you, gentlemen, by the way.
Brilliant.
So let me go ahead and toss up your link while we're just kind of talking.
Someone made a comment in the chat about pet food, and that is actually something that I think is pretty important, because if things go sideways for a couple of weeks or a month or three, you don't want your animals dying on you either. And it's stuff that does last a very long time.
Completely
if you store it properly.
Completely agree. It's like generally when you get it at the store, it's already been there for a number of months to begin with, and the stuff is dehydrated and perfectly ratioed, and as far as the fat content goes, to try and make it last up to years.
Look, I'm not going to recommend eating it yourself, although
No.
I haven't tried. I don't know
No.
if anyone else has. Um,
Well, it's that's kind of a thing that they kid around about. Well, not necessarily kid around about, but that is a thing that is like a general sign of someone who's on welfare or on an elderly person on a stipend is them buying way too much pet food. That's one of the things where you're like, send a welfare check.
okay, well, that's one way around to game the system. Seeing that we have less than a minute, there's a real countdown. The link for the new meeting, is it going to be on the Twitter Messenger?
Yeah, in the Twitter group is where.
We're not going to have any problems with length on this one.
Yep.
I'm just getting it going right now.
Awesome. Okay.
Perfection. And again, I'm just going to I'm just going to go ahead and look at paratus.com and let's go ahead and look at those awesome shirts again.
I'm just copying the invitation.
The ones that I've modeled so badly.
I think they're great.
Thank you, Watcher. Like I said, I should have told you it was like the most cringeworthy part of my site. But hey,
you can always go and like edit something over, like you could edit your logo over your face if you're. All right. So that's it for that. Give us just a second while he drops us a new link, and then we should be good to go. But yeah, these are his shirts on his website. They're pretty cool. There's 2 of them plus a sweatshirt. I think they're pretty banging. I'm gonna get one as soon as possible. All right, that was the wrong link, but I'm sure Joe will realize here in a second. He's also a part of this Dear South Africa project, or dearsafrica.com, which I think is a really stinking cool project that lets people see what's going on in their local governments, and local and national governments, and express their opinion about it. All right, logging into this meeting now. That's not what we wanted. Okay, I see. Give me just a moment to join this. Alright, sorry about this, chat. We won't be having these difficulties in future. Growing Pains, first live stream on the channel. Hey, Joe, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, my camera didn't start. There we go.
There we go. Alright, let me turn it on so the chat can see us.
Yeah. Okay, so the chat can see us. Hey, guys, I'm sorry about that. Watcher was already told that his pay for today was divided in half. I'm dividing it in half again.
Oh boy.
So anyway, we're up and running. All is good. So getting prepared is a vital and important thing. And Gideon, you mentioned the slavery thing earlier. And that's interesting because in the preface to my 3rd book, Defensive Operations, I say that if you're not prepared to produce your own food, produce your own energy, and protect yourselves, you're going to end up as a slave to someone one way or the other. And in the beginning in that I mentioned also in the preface that if they control everything in your life, where your money comes from, where your food comes from, they can force you to bend the knee to them on any topic that they choose. And so being self-sufficient, which is really what preparedness is about, enables you to say, no, man, I'm not doing that. And if they can't force you by means of controlling your food or by means of controlling your money and income, then that only leaves them the option of force. And if you're prepared to defend yourself and your property, well, that makes force somewhat costly. So that's kind of the point of the first 3 books, is getting yourself the first one, the baseline training manual, is where we're getting just the basics of gear and skills and knowing what I need to know, right? Then in book 2, we start with fieldcraft. We're learning the individual skills that get you to where you want to be, such as how to move in a without rule of law society, both in an urban environment and in a rural environment. and how to set up a secure campsite if you have to move from one location to another, how to build a cache, how to hide a certain amount of supplies. And then book 3, defensive operations, is okay, well, the riots are here. There's no governmental services. It's up to us, just like we saw in the videos that we watched over the weekend. It's up to us to set up a roadblock at the end of our cul-de-sac or whatever it is, at our subdivision or our business, and keep people from coming in. So it's a serious 1-to-1 ratio on how much the skills in that book applies to life and without rule of law environment. And you validate that by the fact that you lived through some pretty intense rioting, and you say, yeah, these books could certainly have helped.
Well, just to clarify, I myself didn't live through any of them, but I can tell you one thing.
Watching, and you were closer to it than we were.
Very close friends of mine lived through it. And coincidentally, about 85% of the stuff they did right. I've already come across in like the first half of the baseline training manual that you spoke about it. And when I discussed the book with them, they had a bit of a oh dear moment, because they're like, there's an actual book that talks about this. So I think you've already got at least 3 new readers just based on that alone. Look, small differences between the US situation and the South African one. Something that made my hair stand on end a little bit is the FEMA related legislation, where you could actually have your stuff confiscated by the authorities and be arrested for hoarding simply because you managed to prepare slightly better than the average person. And that the dynamic that comes with that if there is an incident, a disaster, or a breakdown of law and order, you, as opposed to actively seeking out the authorities to obtain help from them, you might actually want to do the polar opposite and wholly avoid running into them at all, which is a bit of a look. Overall in South Africa, I think the average person tries to avoid running into the authorities anyway, due to an inherent problem of corruption, criminality that infests the police force. But we don't have any legislation that actually criminalizes preparedness. Well, at least not yet. I don't want to give them any ideas. But the contents of your preparedness, I mean, someone mentioned water purification in the chat. That's probably more important than a lot of people think, because if the electricity goes out, and we are flirting with a complete grid collapse in SA, and we have for some time. Once the lights go out within 72 hours, you're not going to have water pressure in your running water in all the cities. If you have collected rainwater, you can't drink that stuff just the way it is. You're going to have to prepare it. And if you don't have the luxury of boiling it, because you either don't have gas or you don't have another form of fuel to boil it, at least maybe not in the interim, you may need a chemical method with which to render it safe to drink. It's all these things, these second and third order effects that you spoke of, that they all manifest no matter what the disaster, in almost exactly the same way. And we saw that in Durban now twice. We saw it with the riots, and we saw it again now with the floods.
You bring up a point that a lot of people skip over, and I talk about it all of the time, is that when your power goes out, you have to understand that the water pressure that keeps the bad water and the good water from mixing at the water station is out too. So you have the potential for having some contaminated water come through your pipes. So you just brought that up. So for those watching, if you ever have a power outage, immediately start boiling water, right? When any water you're going to drink or use for cooking, boil it first, because there is that potential for that mix. And I talk about water purification a lot. People don't think about that. They're just used to pulling up the tap and the water comes on. But you need to have a couple of different methods. And despite all of our fancy technology that we have in this year, the best way to purify your water is boiling it, and bringing it to that boil for a minute to 3 minutes kills everything in it. I keep a variety, right? I always have some form of ability to boil water, whether it's a stove, a jet boil stove or something like that, or I have chemical means. I'm not a big fan of the giant filters that a lot of people have, because I know that when, and you've experienced this in South Africa, when people start behaving badly and things are when society collapses, power goes out, people start behaving badly. And the longer I spend at a water source, the more likely I am to encounter other human beings, some of whom will not be friendly. And they'll see me purifying water and they'll be like, oh, that guy did all the work for me. I'm going to go take his water. So instead, I'm really big on chemical methods, or like I use a Sawyer mini filter, because I can just take the water bladder from my Camelback, dunk it in the water that's not purified, throw it back in my Camelback, and the Sawyer mini fits right on the tube, on the drinking tube, and I can filter it as I drink. It's a faster way to do it when moving, right? And then I can fill my canteens with water from there, drop a couple of chemical tabs in there, and it's going to keep me moving. You have to be thinking about water. And I see someone in the chat wrote cheesecloth to strain out particulate. Absolutely. That's step one, right? Use a cheesecloth, then use your chemical method or whatever else you're doing. We talked about the FEMA and some of the things they did, but in Hurricane Katrina, they came and brought aid, but that aid came with requirements. And those requirements were surrender your guns. And, oh, by the way, get in the back of this truck and we're taking you to a forced relocation facility. A lot of people don't remember that actually happened. It did. And the government is not necessarily there to help you.
No, that is, and that's also, once you surrender to something like that, you no longer have control whether or not your family stays together. You're completely at the mercy of strangers. And I think that is the part that freaks me out the absolute most about it. And an interesting aside to South Africa, since we are a country where infrastructure is collapsing faster, I think, than I can talk about it or even write about it, we've had a huge problem with one of our major water sources being the Vaal River. That we've got two big rivers in South Africa. It's the Orange and the Vaal. And the Vaal is basically a Dutch and Afrikaans word for pale. So the Pale River, for want of a better word. It's had a problem with raw sewage getting into it from dysfunctional government sewage treatment facilities that have not been maintained for like the last 27 years. And this lack of maintenance has now resulted in this humongous problem, which rendered a huge amount of the drinking water for Gauteng province, where Johannesburg and Pretoria are located, as not safe to drink. And for the past few years, people have already been conditioned to storing big bottles of mineral water, essentially, in their houses, because of the dubious quality of the tap water, that it might not be safe. So in that sense, most people should, to some degree or another, at least be prepared. But people also don't understand how much water they drink in a day. I mean, the average adult consumes what, between 3.5 to 5 liters of the stuff every single day. If you want to keep a family of 4 hydrated, where you can't get to the store to get your hands on the water, or you don't have another renewable source, you're going to be stacking 300 5-liter bottles, which is a small warehouse worth. It's not possible. So clearly we need to explore other solutions to that problem as well.
And I mention that all the time, is that you cannot store enough water, right? You just have to have a plan for getting it and purifying it, because you're never gonna be able to store enough. And that 3 to 5 liters, though, is current world conditions. That's just sitting at home. Imagine when I'm not driving a car anymore because gas is too expensive and I'm walking everywhere. I'm going to need about twice the amount of water that I was going through before. And it's the same thing with food. There's a debate going on Twitter right now. They were talking about the guy's belt rig setup, and someone was saying, "Oh, you don't need to carry food in there. You can go for a week without food." You can go a week without food now, sitting at home. But if you're moving by foot and you're potentially engaging in combat operations, you can't survive without food for very long, right? I mean, seriously, you have to have that water, and you have to think about food. And as I point out, so many people want to talk about food storage. I say store maybe a couple of months worth of food, but you need to work on food production, right? That's going to be the bigger ability. How does that play out? I know that South Africa has a big hunting community. How does food production play out in South Africa?
Well, if you live in a city badly, because
right.
you know, and it's not just a case of a lack of opportunity. The average South African suburb has plenty of space for a fairly significant vegetable garden. I mean, the more urban you go, the less those. If you live in a proper urban setting, you're a bit poked. I don't think you've got much of a chance. But it's also a case of, and I'm sure it's no different in America, although you guys seem to have a very healthy attitude towards personal independence from, you know, commercial sources. Is people are conditioned to get their food from a local grocery store. They're not the thought of seriously manufacturing their own food outside of rural communities doesn't really exist. Rural communities are a different story. Those people grow their own stuff, they bottle it, they preserve it. When it comes to animal protein and meat, they hunt it, they shoot it, they dry it in biltong, which is our version of beef jerky. There is so much. I mean, they make rusks, which is essentially a hard-baked biscuit that lasts forever. It's really nutritious. There are all these skills that exist, and that you're capable of keeping yourself fed with actually pretty decent food for a very long time. But you have to put in the effort, and if those skills are lost, then you have a problem. And the knock-on of that, you know, with that rule of law situation, if it's completely chaotic because there's no food, there's no water, there's no electricity, it means that the overwhelming majority of your population are very desperate scavengers or predators. And that makes, for a personal security point of view, a very unsafe situation. But that's exactly what's going to happen.
So first, I wanted to show you that I have a package right here. My background's messing with it. Package of Buildsong right here on my desk. Some
Excellent.
South Africans introduced me to that, and I can't stop. It costs a lot more than the jerky here, but I just can't stop buying it. It's good stuff.
It's good stuff.
I'm going to learn how to do it this year and maybe do a deer that way. So I'll figure it out. And see, that's the thing is, you mentioned our self-sufficiency here, but it's gone. In America, I point this out all of the time, that in America, as recently as the 1950s, every house in America grew a garden. Everyone had food. But now they don't. And especially in the urban areas, you see whenever a disaster happens, where's the government with my food? And that's a really bad spot to be in. That leads to that slavery situation that we talked about. So there is a movement now to start it, but I honestly think that this year in America, and I think throughout the world, really, if you're not growing food of your own this year, you might be in a really tough spot at the end of the year. So there's a question for you from someone from South Africa in the chat. It says, Gideon, what about JoJo tanks? Is that a practical option, especially if the water source is a borehole?
I'd say yes. So JoJo tanks are these big, thick plastic rainwater collection tanks. They're very popular. They're very durable, and they're well made, and they can store. You can store tens of gallons, if not hundreds of gallons in them, depending upon their size. That would be gallons or liters. That doesn't matter. A ton of it. And they've been. I mean, I've got two of them. Not the big ones, but big enough. I've got about 80 to 100 liters of rainwater. Now, that's enough to keep a vegetable garden kind of going during the summer months, because in Cape Town, we don't get rain in summer. It's a winter rain area, so we call it, or climate. But it's all these things. To get a borehole, link it up to a JoJo tank is a very rational solution. But you probably, you can drink that stuff, but you need to make it safe first. There's a process
first. Yeah. Especially if you don't know are the tanks only used for water, or they potentially have been used for something else first?
They're primarily water. You could possibly store something else in them. I would not store fuel in them, for example, because that would probably dissolve the lining, and eat through it.
Yeah.
But jerry cans
only been used for water, you could just treat it and then be okay. Yeah.
Then of course there's the other side, because with the electricity situation, I keep at least 2 full tanks worth of fuel for my car in jerry cans. And because fuel only lasts about safely, what, 3 to 4 months, 6 months, I think, if you really look after it. You need to keep a schedule to rotate those out. But
you see, that's another big problem in preparedness. People will fill up those 5-gallon tanks, set them in their garage, and then a year later think about rotation. And by then, if you haven't treated it, it's too late. It might work in your lawnmower, but it's not going to run your car.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing. And I think that's something I forgot to mention is do think about fuel as well, that you can get out. And when you mention planning your route out of where you stay, if you need to leave, in South Africa, that comes with interesting challenges because most of our major roads, which you would be avoiding anyway, because of the sheer gridlock on them would make it a total death trap, go past low income areas where, you know, informal settlements, squatter camps, that sort of stuff. And that doesn't mean that the people who live there are hostile, but there are extremely dangerous criminal elements embedded in those population groups that target those population groups and that target outside of those population groups. And it's an absolute guarantee that if you have a breakdown of law and order to the worst case scenario extent that we've seen in this country, that you don't want to go anywhere that might expose you to those elements, because it's not a confrontation that you want to get into, especially if you've got your family in the car with you and you're just trying to get out of the city into a safer secondary location.
And if you think about that, grid down, there's no food delivery, there's no water coming. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're in one of these townships and along comes a car. That car means lots of things to you. And this is one of the ideas I try to express to people. That car means there's probably fuel. That car means there's probably food. And that car means there's probably other supplies that people want. And your neighbors can be the nicest people right now. But when a crisis happens, you don't know how they're going to react. After 5 days of no food, 5 days of their children having no food, how are your neighbors going to react? And I tell a story of, remember last year, there was rioting throughout Lebanon, right? Lebanon and Israel. So there was a town in northern Israel that bordered right up against Lebanon that's half Jewish, half Muslim. And they had family picnics. Their kids all went to school together. The families all knew each other. But the minute when the rioting started and Hezbollah came in the neighborhood, all of the Arab residents pointed to their friends and said, those are the Jews. And the Muslims then went and proceeded to attempt to burn down the houses with the people in it. The people were able to get out. But the woman who tells the story is like, these people have been in my house. They play with my children. I leave my kids with them every day. And the minute trouble came, within an hour of riots starting, they were pointing me out as a target to the rioters. So there's a lesson in there, right? You here in America, you fly your American flag all day, every day. Your neighbors don't. When Black Lives Matter and Antifa comes on your block and they're looking for a house, if I'm that neighbor who goes, well, they're either going to burn my house or somebody they don't like's house, I'm going to show them the guy they probably don't like. And it's that guy over there. He had a Trump flag in his yard, or he had an F Joe Biden flag or whatever. Or he flies a church flag every now and then. So go target him instead of me. That's one thing you have to worry about. And the other thing is exactly that too. You come into an area where there's been no food, nothing going on, and there's no government existing. And all of a sudden you're driving through in a car. Their first thought is, that's where I can get some food. And that's going to be a big problem. So that's a great point. You have to plan your routes to avoid those. And you know what, as much as I've got all this stockpile of gear here, I know that I have to move most of it beforehand somewhere else, because let's just say that whatever happens so fast that I can't get out in a car. Roads are gridlocked and everything. I'm only going to be able to get out with what I have on my back, and that's going to be like less than 1/10 of what I have here. So you have to have a couple of different setups. One is your it'd be nice to have this setup, and the other is if I've got to leave right now, here it is. So it's good stuff. That's why when I talk about the books, I talk about your get home bag, your belt kit, then your everyday kit, then a full ruck. Those are my different levels, right? In an absolute and total emergency, I'm going to grab whatever I can and go. And I at least have a smaller version of everything I need. That's kind of a starter kit. And I was talking with someone the other day that they asked me about caching supplies. So behind me, here's a picture of a nice, pretty stream that's about 2 miles from here in an urban trail setting. So I live in a city, but less than a half mile from me is a trailhead that goes through these trails that if you follow them, they will lead you out of town. That's my backup emergency route if I can't leave by car, right? I'm going to get on this trail system and move. So inside that trail system, first, right here by my house, there's a cache hidden that has down, buried underground, a backpack and a little bit of food, a little bit of water, and some other supplies. We'll just leave it at that, designed to get me safely from that point to the end of the trail. At the end of the trail is a second cache that's just a resupply of food. So I can take a day or two to leave the urban area along this trail, resupply my own food, and then keep moving. You have to have different levels of plans like that, rather than just having one overarching plan. Because as I pointed out in the book, so your plan is to load up your car and drive out. Well, you load up your car and drive out, and you immediately encounter a roadblock where the police, as we saw in South Africa last year during the riots, the police relieve you of a lot of your extra gear, right? And keep it for themselves. So it's pretty wild.
That's the thing, and there's some unique challenges to our major urban environments here, in the sense that the urban densification is quite severe, and even if you could leave an urban area on foot, your chances of not making it out the other side in one piece is a significant concern. So what we saw at the Durban riots last year is we had entire communities that were essentially trapped. There was one way in and one way out of those neighborhoods, and they couldn't get out. So what they did is they essentially had a strong point at that entrance that they reinforced, and they guarded it and they controlled it. And that's what I think saved a great many communities, the fact that they recognized the extent of the situation, and they quickly adapted in order to address the most major threat facing them at that point in time. And then they kept making it up on the fly quite effectively. The thing that concerned me about it, looking back, is it becomes quite obvious that there wasn't really a preparedness plan. And I also think you mentioned in the book, like, the plan isn't going to survive. The plan is really just there to give structure and framework to something that you're going to be adapting to as the situation dynamically changes constantly. And they did do very well with adapting to their circumstances, but they didn't really have a plan beyond, oh shit, let's do this thing quickly. Right. And then constantly reacting. And at least if you have a plan, you can be proactive as opposed to constantly reactive, which is exactly why I think what you're writing about is so vitally important. Because I don't know if we're going to have another July riot this year. It's impossible to predict these things because they can happen in the blink of an eye, but we are definitely in for more trouble. And yeah, I don't know if that's similar to your situation in the US.
Well, I think that we're starting to see some things kick up. I've been predicting for a while that we were going to have a new series of riots because of the elections coming up in the fall, to attempt to get you to think right. And then we have this shooting here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, about 2.5 hours from me, where the optics are just bad. Although, when you look at my video review here on the channel, you'll see that the officer didn't have a choice, but the optics are really bad because he ends up shooting a refugee from the Congo in the back of the head with a gun. And it's not the officer's fault. The bad guy fought with him, took his taser from him, all that kind of stuff. But the optics are just right that they're pushing this narrative that the police officer assassinated him. And so that's going to raise up the conflict level already. Then when you get to just astronomical food prices, the price of eggs has gone up 200% in the last couple of months.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And fuel prices are through the roof. That's just a perfect storm for disorder. So I don't know that we're going to get to the Durban levels or KwaZulu Natal levels, but we're going to get somewhere. And we need to be prepared for it. And when you mentioned that whole checkpoint thing, hey, right here, book I forgot my background messes up. Book 3, there's an entire chapter on setting up the various kinds of checkpoints you might need, an entry control point for your neighborhood, which is what those guys set up. Setting up a checkpoint further down the road just to gather information. So let's say one of my bug out locations is here in Michigan. It's up north. We have a series of cabins. And there's probably 20 cabins spread out along 1.5 miles of road. Rather than shutting off each individual driveway, band together, get 3 or 4 guys from each group and go set up a checkpoint further down the road to just talk to people and see where they're going. Well, if they're looking for food, we're going to send them in the other direction. They're not going to come down this stretch of road. They're going to go somewhere else. Hey, town is that way, 6 miles. There's no food this way. And I saw that in some of the riot footage from last year. One neighborhood had set up some signs. There's no fuel here. There's no food here, right? Essentially saying, listen, go somewhere other than here. Basically the implying threat is, we don't want to hurt you, but we will, right? You know, go somewhere other than here. There's nothing for you here. Go somewhere else. And I think that they did a very creditable job with no preparation. Imagine how much better it would have been if they had already set it up and already trained and been in a spot for it. And, you know, and a lot of people worry, you know, what about the police and how they feel about it? Well, first of all, I don't really care because, you know, without rule of law situation, a badge is worth exactly nothing. But if you actually have honest law enforcement in your area, they're going to be grateful if you seal off and protect your neighborhood, because they then know, all right, I don't have to worry about those guys. They're good. I can focus my efforts elsewhere on other areas that might need help. So pretty good stuff. Now, you mentioned being in a position to defend yourself and all of that. Now, I was looking at your site. You do some sort of training with that for people?
I do. I do everything from most of the stuff I do is handgun combatives and fundamentals, and some unarmed combatives as well. I've just started getting into that, thanks to a couple of Kelly McCann books and DVDs, and I got a gun guard because I'm going to need it. I've been boxing for a while, or rather learning to not knock myself out. That's probably a more accurate description of what I'm doing. And I do enjoy it, but there is a breadth of skill development that I think is important for people to do, is focus on a broad thing, not just the guns, but the gun stuff. I love teaching it. I love training it. It's a lot of fun. And I feel that it is a value add to people, especially in South Africa. We do not have a good gun culture here. And I'll explain why I say that. In America, if you own a gun, you're going to be interested in going with that firearm, whether it's a handgun or a revolver, pistol, revolver, rifle, shotgun, to some sort of shooting range and getting to become proficient with it. It's a cultural thing from an outsider looking in, that Americans take it seriously. South Africans, we had this weird thing, and I blame the statist past of a history of the country from 1948 onwards, where we lost our pioneer spirit. We started deferring more and more of our personal private responsibilities to a big government, central government. And where you own a firearm, but you leave it locked in the safe, or you only take it on a road trip with you in a little zipper baggie, just in case, you know, there's trouble, because trouble will send you a telegram ahead of time, so you can, you know, take the gun out of the baggie and be like, oh, one moment, we're going to do the shootout the civilized way. You know, it doesn't just spring out and hit you, which I always found a ridiculous concept. But there's a lot of the older generation South African that still buys into that. Fortunately, not all of them. There's a significant number that don't. But the younger generation is much more, I'd say, proactive in what they do. They want to learn. They want to become proficient. They see what the American guys are busy training and what they're doing, for better and for worse. You know, not all instructors are equal. But the thing is, there's a desire to learn and develop that there wasn't previously. And that's a very good thing.
Well, the best advice I'll give is, if any training video you South Africans want to watch is from a place called T-Rex Arms, skip it, go to something else, do something real. And as far as the guys,
so just to reassure you, my school of people that I really love referencing is Dave Spalding. I think the man is an absolute legend. I quite like Pat McNamara, even though his ADD is off the charts. And the old school guys like Masada Yub and obviously Kelly, but he does more unarmed stuff. I'm building my training library slowly. I'm looking at it now. Oh, and obviously Clint Smith, the curmudgeon that he is. Like, I thoroughly enjoy.
Clint has his own Clintisms, which are great, and I love him. His own little phrases in there, so that's good. You're on the right track. Just stay away from our boys over there at T-Rex Arms, and they're jumping on moving cars and running around in your skinny jeans. But I always tell everyone you have to have some sort of unarmed skills as well as firearm skills. Everyone wants to talk about the guns that they have, but a couple of things. Number one, a gun might not be the appropriate tool. It might be too loud, right? Or it might be an overreaction. But you have to have unarmed skills because sometimes that attack happens at such close quarters and so violently, you don't have time to draw a gun. And sometimes, as I point out, drawing a gun or drawing a knife isn't the right first step. You have to gain space first. So having some sort of unarmed skills is the way to go. My experience, I'm a Kyosidin, which is an international instructor in Tang Soo Do. It's a Korean martial art, and I also teach Krav Maga. But then there's the people who are purists about any one system. So I like hearing that you don't have a system. You're picking it up from Kelly McCann and some of the others. That's a good way to go, because these guys who do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm not saying it's a bad martial art. It's a great martial art. It is some skills you need to have, but anything that encourages you to roll around on the ground, especially in a without rule of law situation, is folly. It's good to have the skills so you can get off of the ground, right, and fight somebody who does attack you and take you to the ground, but don't rely on it as your number one thing, right? In a without rule of law situation, the ground is going to be full of broken glass, wood, all that stuff. It's going to be a pretty rough situation. So you need some ground skills, but don't rely on them. You got to have something. And I always say this: unarmed skills enable you to live long enough to get a gun or a knife, a handgun or a knife in the fight, and a handgun or a knife let you live long enough to get a rifle into the fight, which is what you probably should have had your hands in the first place. I also add on knife skills are vital. Learn how to use a knife. And I don't mean just, how to make things and whittle things with your knife, but learn how to fight with a knife. There's actually some very specific skill sets to it. And those same skills that you use to fight with a knife, you can use with a stick. And don't tell me that there is not a place in the world where you can't find a stick, right? Sticks are everywhere. You can grab a stick and fight. I see Watcher here has a question. What do we think about the Marine Corps martial arts program, Joe? Well, I think it's fantastic. Having a black belt in Marine Corps martial arts, it's not all that it sounds like having a black belt on that. It's like having a...
You got your red tab?
It's like having a... Yeah, I do. I'm an instructor.
Yeah.
So the thing is, it's not like having a black belt in another martial art. It's really more like having a red belt somewhere else. But it's good stuff. I've just always been a big fan of having unarmed skills, mainly because working in the private sector, most of my work, when we do protection work, everyone's armed, but most of my work was actually in a retail investigation side. And when you're out investigating crimes in a retail environment, you don't get to carry a gun. And so you have to fight with the bad guys with your hands, a little mano a mano action. And I've just always maintained those skills because I'm not the one getting hurt. They are. And so that's just good stuff. Good stuff. You have to have those kind of skills. And some people say to me all the time, man, listen, I like your stuff, but I just want to be prepared. I don't want to fight a war. I don't want to be a soldier boy. Guess what? When the time comes, you will not have a choice. Yeah, you'll have a choice of being a soldier boy and protecting your own stuff, or being somebody else's slave. It's that simple. A lot of people just think you're going to live out some sort of little house on the prairie cosplay where I'm going to get my house, we're going to build our farm, we're going to go hunting and fishing, and everyone else is just going to leave you alone. And that's just not the case. When you look at the former Yugoslavia, you look at South Africa last year, you look at Argentina during their economic collapse, really anywhere, Ukraine today. And as soon as the government forces are gone, there are people out trying to take from others, no matter how peaceful you are. And so I go back to an old martial arts saying that says, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. I mean,
That makes complete sense to me. And I think what adds to that is, we don't really live in communities anymore. We actually live in a society. And a society is just an artificial construct where you take a whole bunch of people who actually have nothing in common with each other at all for the most part, except they happen to inhabit the same geographic space, usually quite densely. And this amorphous blob of people need to navigate the same infrastructure to be somehow economically productive. So you don't have a deeper connection with anyone else around you, whether it's emotional, spiritual, or whatever. Whereas in a community, you have some form of, it has an identity, it has a core, it has a structure, it has principles, it has guidance. It doesn't have this flimsy thing, which is rule of law, which, as I think you didn't say this in your book, but it creates the pictures. The moment there's not a policeman around, rule of law actually doesn't really exist, especially if the policeman is entirely absent probably for the foreseeable future. Whereas if you had a real community, that's a different story. You have norms, you have values, they are enforceable, and they're enforceable by every other person in that community. If you have a significant incident or catastrophe that erodes a society, then that's precisely what's going to happen, is you're going to become a potential resource for other people. And at the moment, we all are, and they're just called criminals, and they're in the minority, and we can relatively, I'm not say easily, but in relative terms, easily deal with them. But if you sit in a genuine, hurricane, there's a lot of horror stories from the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina that I wasn't even aware of. And when you start doing a bit of a deep dive into it, you realize just how outright chaotic the entire situation was. And
well, I'll tell you that, like, as an example, Blackwater, the private military contractor company, fought a pitched battle with gang members for a bridge for almost a day. Ask me how I know. That barely made the news story. And when you actually look back at some of the videos, you see the rescuers in their boats, and they all have ARs. They're all pointed outboard, and people go, "Oh, well, that's just because it was dangerous." No, it's because they were literally being shot at by people who were just wanting the boat and the gun, right? So it was a lot more of a horror story than people knew, and it's good to hear you point that out. I wanted to mention something you brought up about that community versus where people live. So here where I live in the city, I barely know my neighbors. I know the 3 neighbors that are Marines, and I know the people right next to me, but I don't know anyone else on the block. Now, when you leave the city and you go up north to where the cabin is, I know everybody for probably a 2-mile radius, and they know they can come on my property, I can go on theirs, and everyone watches out for each other. That's a community. Down here, it's just that artificial construct you're talking about. And on the point of without rule of law thing, here's the best example for it. I don't know if it applies in South Africa, but it applies here. So for those of you in the chat, let me know how this is. So when you're on the freeway and you're driving along and the speed limit is 70 miles an hour and there's no state trooper around, everyone kicks that car up to 75 or 80 miles an hour. They come over the hill and there's a policeman in the center of the highway. What does everyone do? They slam on the brakes and slow down to get in compliance with the law. And I tell that and everyone kind of laughs about it, but it's that easy for people to justify breaking the law because there was no policeman around. So why not? And the reason why people don't go and loot their neighbors right now is a lack of need, right? I make money. I can go to the store and buy it. I might get caught by the police. And so I don't need to go to that extreme. If the police were gone and the source of money and food were gone, people will automatically go to that almost immediately who aren't prepared. And you need to be ready for that.
Well, look at San Francisco. It's something that's popped into my head now. You have police, but you have essentially decriminalized shoplifting. And everything I've seen about it is it looks like outright chaos there, because it's people literally walk into a department store, load up their arms with clothes or high value consumer goods, and just walk out with no consequences. And I don't know if that has become normalized, or if it's still just an occasional sort of occurrence, but there's clearly enough people in society that are entirely law bound, in the sense that they have no principles, The only thing that's keeping them in check is the existence of a law and order element. And the moment that's removed or diminished, there's no inhibitor that keeps them in check.
Yeah, that's it exactly. So what happened was is in those states when they made an announcement that, okay, so if you steal less than $950, you're not going to be prosecuted. Immediately, that element of society went out and immediately began stealing $949 6 or 7 times a day, because it became legally acceptable to do so, right? And the more we allow that, the more we slide, and it might seem like social justice and it might seem like restorative justice, it's actually only hastening our fall into a complete without rule of law society. And I pointed out many times that I honestly think that you are halfway through a collapse right now. You just don't know it because it doesn't look like all the movies told you it would look like, right? There was no Book of Eli moment where the world just stopped existing. And I think that when you look at most collapses that have happened in the modern world, I guess probably outside of Yugoslavia and Ukraine, they've been slow slides where, like even in South Africa, the police still existed, the government still existed, they just didn't do anything. And I think probably the best example is Mexico. So the United States of Mexico, which is their official name, they exist. The federal government exists, but the federal government controls nothing outside of federal government compounds that look like a forward operating base you would see in Iraq. The criminal element controls the remainder of the country. And for those who think that that's not true, look at what happened last year when the Mexican government tried to exert itself and arrest one of the cartel leaders. The cartel attacked a city, and the Mexican government essentially surrendered to the cartels and let the guy go and withdrew from the city. So that's a more likely scenario than a complete and total collapse.
Yep, I think that's entirely accurate, and it's a similar sort of thing that we see here. Is we have a very there were quite a few research reports that came out since 2008. I think there have been 3 of them called The Broken Blue Line by an organization called the South African Institute of Race Relations. They're a very good think tank and a very thorough one. And they've effectively detailed the fact that the South African police service is more infiltrated by criminals and gangs than they've succeeded in infiltrating in turn themselves. And that the amount of corruption, criminality in entire state departments and the authorities themselves and security services is extensive. I mean, this is how you end up with naval bases and military bases being targeted, where the armories are raided for hand grenades, anti-tank weapons have been recovered in the hands of gangs down here. It's a case where the state supplies the criminals with arms and ammunition in return for money, and there's no meaningful mechanism of consequence that is being brought to bear because there's no effective command and control, and probably even the upper echelons of the top brass are infiltrated by criminals, as well as the politicians who are supposed to be doing oversight on it. So you effectively have this gangster state that's operating its own little parallel economy, and you end up having stuff like construction mafias and political assassinations and human trafficking and drug trafficking, and it's all ties into each other, and that's exactly it. And it was a slow decline. In 1994, that wasn't quite the case. In 2022, it's a very different picture, and it's going in one direction. And it's happening slow enough.
I had farm murders. I know it's a delicate subject down there, but I've seen some evidence of some pretty high-tech gear in the possession of those conducting some of the farm attacks, like cell jammers and things like that. Is that true? Is that something that does happen?
It has happened. So the whole farm attack, rural security situation in South Africa is such a it's its own box of chocolates with regards to the variety of aspects and issues it has. So you've got the guy.
Phrase. I'm still that's its own box of chocolates. Anyway, go ahead.
That's it. For some reason, Forrest Gump just came out, but you have these guys that appear to be possess some form of military training, military background. They come in with cell phone jammers and signal jammers. They come in with a fair amount of equipment. They know how to stalk, how to not leave a trail. They are, and they have been active serving members of the Defence Force court in the wake of farm attacks as part of the gang that did it. So that element is present. Then you have other less organized gangs, but that are just as violent as the worst of them. And they all do it for different motivations. There's definitely a political element to it, but whether or not it's a general political element from the governing party or not is difficult to say, because there are so many different factions, each pursuing their own agenda, that it becomes difficult to say, well, is this official ANC policy, or is this purely official policy from some faction that's pursuing this for their own ends? And is it national or is it regional? And then when you start bringing trade unions into it, and you start bringing labor disputes, and you start bringing the EFF, it's a mess of different people with different motives, all being hostile to the rural farming community, but not necessarily just to one race either. We've had black farmers being attacked. We've had black farm workers being attacked. We've had entire rural communities who are not part of the white minority population attacked and outright brutalized as part of this thing. So it's almost a case of, I'm not going to say a conspiracy that there's a war on food production in South Africa and food security, but the more I look at it, the more it seems that way, because, you know, there is no, if food security was a priority, which it should be in a country of 60 million people who could starve at a moment's notice, and the issues that could come of that, we'd have definite security initiatives in place in order to ensure that the property rights, rule of law, and that productivity is safeguarded. And there's no other case. There's no urgency, will, or desire from government. It almost appears that this decline is acceptable to them, if not even desirable. And yeah, that's the big picture overview.
Well, food security is a big issue all the way around, right? So it's funny to hear you say a coordinated attack on food security there, and yet here we're having these random fires and explosions, and even 2 aircraft slamming into food production plants, which are totally accidents, totally a coincidence. And I get it, they might be coincidences, but they're all coming at the same time as food shortages are already looming. Fertilizer is incredibly hard to come by this year, and trains in America are now refusing to carry fertilizer. I'm not really sure why. They say it's a shortage of rolling stock, but if your train is moving, it doesn't really matter what it's hauling, right? The fact that you're refusing to haul fertilizer tells me that there's a little bit more to it. So, and I think that goes to what you opened this whole thing up with, is the dependency lifestyle. If I can threaten food security, it's going to make people flock to government assistance and government handouts. So I think that we need to be aware of that. And as I keep saying, that self-sufficiency solves all. If you're able to provide for yourself, first of all, you're in good shape. If you're able to provide a little bit of excess so that you can trade for others for the other things you need, you're going to be in an even better spot, but you'd better be able to defend what you have and protect what you have. So as we're at about the 1 hour mark, we should probably think about wrapping it up. What other thoughts or warnings do you have from South Africa that you think can apply to us in the coming months?
So just the stuff that I've seen here and picked up on domestically is the fact that you do want a form of mutual assistance group. You definitely do. And there's people that you know intimately, that you trust, who you can rely on, and that equally rely on you for certain role fulfillments, and coordinate with them pertaining to a realistic plan of how you are going to deal with those second and third order effects over varying lengths of time. Because going something like this alone is, from the rioting we've seen previously in the flooding, is not going to happen. The other thing, and something you guys are probably well aware of, is that government response is either entirely absent or it's extremely late and wholly inadequate to, when the point is there. That's what I saw from the rioting in major US cities last year, as well as when you see in the wake of most natural disasters, is for a long period of time. Well, let me rephrase that. You're always the first responder to your personal emergency, no matter how efficient the government is. But the period that you might have to sustain yourself and the people you care about in a hostile work environment is probably going to be longer than I think most people think. And when the likelihood of an incident leading to that increases due to, I mean, you guys have got everything we've had that is causing chaos. You've got rising inflation, specifically with regards to energy prices and food prices. Those are never good. You've got a very divided society where a segment of it, from an outside looking in, appears to be violently mentally ill, and that are probably capable of predatory acts that are on par with the worst we've got here. And they have demonstrated those abilities and intentions previously. The water situation in the US may not be as bad as our water situation, but that's still going to be a knock-on effect. So I think, pertaining to what you guys can learn from us, I think you've already kind of got a good idea. You've got the same elements present, maybe not as intense and as out of control, but in some aspects they might be worse. And I think just following the advice in your book, buy Joe's book. Basically, the only reason we have this hour-long discussion is so I could end up by saying, buy all of Joe's books, please. And on that bombshell, I'd also like to extend an official invite to you live on air to my first live stream I'm going to be hosting in probably nearly 6 months, which will set up in good time and get some good marketing on it to talk about exactly this to the South African audience, because I think,
yeah, absolutely,
we have nothing close to as comprehensive as to what you've put out available locally, and I need people to read your book.
I appreciate that. And what you don't know is that I already volunteered your services for an event in Brazil, where you and I will go live and speak with a self-defense person in Brazil to a meeting of a few hundred people. So just so you know, I'll give you some details on that.
Awesome. I'm always keen for stuff like this.
Yeah, well, they're starting like an NRA type organization in Brazil. They've never had one, and they've got people just getting into firearms and self-defense. And he goes, "Do you know anybody else internationally who might be available?" I'm like, "I know just the guy." So that's pretty cool.
Well, I'm very flattered.
Watcher,
Thanks, Joe.
yeah. Watcher, you got anything for us?
No, hey, just thank you guys for being here. We've got 26 people here for our very first live stream, which is, honestly, guys, it's a big deal. We really appreciate you. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. The links to everything we've mentioned today are already in the description down below, and so we'll just end it here and see you guys soon. Thank you all for being here.